Billionaire CEO took the nanny to a company gala, but what happened on stage changed everything. "You'll wear red. Be ready by 8. You're coming with me." That's what he said, no smile, no explanation, just a command. I was still holding Leo's puzzle piece when Oliver Blackwell walked in, cold as the November air behind him. Billionaire, CEO, my boss. I blinked, unsure I heard right. "Sir, I'm the nanny, not your anything else." He didn't flinch. "You are tonight." And just like that, my ordinary life cracked at the edges. Not because I said yes, but because deep down, I wanted to say yes. Not for him, but to prove to myself I was more than forgotten resumes and second chances. And if he thought he could control me like a line in his corporate script, he'd just hired the wrong woman for the part. Some women fall in love once and believe it's enough. I wasn't one of them. I'd loved, foolishly, once before, and when my mother got sick, I gave up the rest. College. Reams. They say grief carves space into you. I didn't know it could also fill it with responsibilities, overdue bills, and the sound of your little sister crying because she missed mom. Didn't plan to become a nanny, but it paid just enough. And Leo, he reminded me what gentle looked like. That night, we were building a cardboard castle when Oliver Blackwell walked in like a winter storm. Silent, sharp, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my rent. He said he needed me. Correction. He needed someone. The original date had canceled for his company's gala, and in his world, problems weren't problems, they were assignments. I stood there holding a giraffe-shaped puzzle piece while he rewrote the rules of our arrangement, like I was a character in his boardroom spreadsheet. But I wasn't a number. Not anymore. "I hired a stylist," he said, as if that would convince me, "and someone else to stay with Leo." Like I didn't matter. Like I was replaceable. Again, I wanted to say no, to throw the whole moment back at him. But instead, I whispered, "I'll go, but on one condition." His brow raised slightly. "I won't pretend to be someone I'm not." He nodded, slowly, like a man who didn't hear no often and wasn't sure what to do when he did. The stylist arrived an hour later. Race. Mid-40 sass, bright-eyed, armed with fabric and lipstick like armor. "You're raw material, sweetheart." "And I love raw," she said. Her voice made me feel like maybe, just maybe, I wasn't invisible. The dress was red, simple, elegant, like something a woman would wear when she stopped hiding. When I walked down the mansion stairs at 7:58 p.m., Oliver looked up from fixing his tie, and he froze. Not dramatically, just for a second, a tiny crack in that perfect mask. "You look acceptable." I smiled. "Not bad for a nanny, huh?" He didn't answer. He just held out his arm. I took it, not because I wanted the fairy tale, but because I was tired of standing in corners and watching other people live. This wasn't love. It wasn't even real. It was one night, a favor, a mask. But somewhere, deep down, I knew. Nothing would be the same after this. Chapter 1, The Contract. "I pay well," he said, like it answered every question. Like that made it okay. But it didn't. Not for a woman who'd learned the cost of being bought. The town car pulled up to the Westbury Grand just as the November wind picked up. The sky was bruised with clouds, and the doorman barely looked at me when he opened the door. Because girls like me didn't arrive at galas. Not without a name, not without status. Not unless they were serving hors d'oeuvres. Oliver stepped out first, buttoning his black coat with effortless grace, like the world bent to him, like his footsteps never echoed, only landed. I stayed in the car a beat longer, maybe to gather my courage, maybe to remind myself I wasn't Cinderella. Not really. There was no fairy godmother. Just a dress borrowed from someone else's closet and a promise to act like this was nothing. He turned, waiting. No words, no smile, just that blank expression that made him impossible to read. The kind that left you wondering if you impressed him or disappointed him. I stepped out. "Let's get through this," I murmured. His eyes flicked to me. "Try to smile." "And if I don't?" He hesitated. "Just don't spill anything." I let out a soft laugh. Now that I can manage. Inside, the ballroom glowed. All crystal chandeliers and champagne flutes and tuxedos. The kind of place where laughter is quiet but eyes are loud, where everyone sees but no one really looks. Oliver walked ahead with his usual confidence, one hand gently resting on my back. Not affectionate, just strategic. Like I was part of a business presentation he needed to nail. When we reached the center of the room, heads turned, whispers floated. The red dress, the unknown woman, the CEO's unexpected companion. I stood straighter. Let them wonder. He leaned in slightly. That's Meredith. I followed his gaze. His ex-fiancée. Flawless skin, porcelain posture, and eyes that scanned me like a barcode. He approached with 2 associates in tow, her voice sweet as a sugar-coated knife. Oliver, you're not usually one for surprises. He nodded politely. Meredith. And this is Lillian Cruz, I answered, extending my hand. It's lovely to meet you. She shook it with 2 fingers, delicate, as if I might stain her manicure. Interesting color choice, she said, her gaze flicking to my dress. Red is bold. I've never liked being invisible, I said simply. There was a pause, just long enough for her smile to tighten. Well, it certainly works. Do you work at Blackwell Holdings? Something like that. Meredith raised a sculpted brow. How? Modern. Oliver cleared his throat. Meredith, he said firmly, maybe it's time you greeted your actual guests. She blinked, surprised, then offered a hollow smile and glided away. I turned to him. You just defended me. I just redirected attention. Right, I said with a small smile. Mustn't let the gossip get too close to home. He didn't reply, but his jaw ticked just slightly. Dinner moved in slow courses, clinking glasses, memorized speeches, laughter that didn't reach anyone's eyes. I watched everything, the power plays, the polished small talk, the hunger hidden behind velvet napkins. You're observing, Oliver said beside me, low voice. I'm surviving. He glanced at me. Not your world? Not yet, I whispered. He tilted his head. You plan to take over one day? I plan to matter, that's all. He stared at me longer than he should have, then sipped his wine. The surprise came halfway through dessert. A tall man approached, French accent, elegant gray suit. Miss Cruz, a pleasure, he said. We met briefly at your arrival. May I sit? I looked at Oliver. She can answer for herself, Oliver said flatly. I smiled at the man. Please, join us. He introduced himself as Mr. Beaumont, one of the green energy investors Oliver's team had been courting. I must say, he said, your commentary earlier about the community initiatives, quite insightful. I raised an eyebrow. You overheard? I listened, he corrected, and I was curious. Oliver looked at me, stunned. You've read our internal reports? Only the ones you left open on the kitchen counter, I said with a slight smile. And the Horizon file you printed in blue ink, it caught my eye. Mr. Beaumont laughed. She has an eye for detail. Oliver leaned back slowly. Apparently. I'd be honored to hear more, the investor continued. Perhaps over coffee? I met his gaze, then Oliver's. I'd like that, I said, if my schedule allows. Later that night, back in the car, I stared out the window as the city blurred past. That was a performance, he said quietly. Which part? The gala or pretending I belonged? You did belong. His voice was flat, but something about the way he said it made my chest tighten. You didn't correct Meredith? He looked at me. Should I have? I don't know, I said, but silence says more than people think. When we pulled up to the penthouse, he didn't move. I have a proposition, he said finally. I turned to him. 2 months. Fake relationship, appearances only. I'll compensate you generously. You'll still care for Leo, but you'll attend events with me. The image matters. I stared at him. Image? Investors trust stability. They like stories that make sense, and right now, you make sense. Because I look good in red? Because you make me look good? I laughed once, bitterly. Say it plain, Oliver. You want to buy my presence. He didn't deny it. But, he added, I want someone who doesn't flinch when things get real. I thought of Leo's drawing that morning, me, him, Oliver, and a dinosaur in the middle. I thought of the sound of applause, of Meredith's tight smile, and the way the world stared, like they didn't expect me to hold my own. I turned back to him. Then here's my contract. His brow rose. More. Full control over Leo's care, no interference. 2. I wear what I want. Fine. 3. I don't lie. If someone asks, I tell them what I do. He hesitated, within reason. 4. I decide when this ends. He studied me for a long time, then nodded. Deal. I extended my hand. He shook it. And in that moment, between cold skin and unspoken boundaries, something shifted. It wasn't love. Not yet. But it wasn't fake either. Cliffhanger. Final lines. Later that night, as I washed Leo's hands after dinner, he looked up at me and whispered, Are you a princess now? I smiled. Something like that. And as I looked at my reflection in the window, the red dress still hanging behind the door, I wondered if pretending to be something more might just help me become it. Chapter 2. The Woman in Red. They didn't see a nanny. They saw possibility, danger, curiosity, all in red. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel small under their gaze. I felt seen. There's a moment at every gala when the crowd pauses. You can feel it, like the breath between songs, or the flicker before a candle burns brighter. For me, it was the second I stepped past the entryway with Oliver beside me. Conversation stalled, heads turned, someone's champagne nearly tilted. It wasn't just the dress. It was me, standing where I supposedly didn't belong, and not shrinking. The ballroom at the Westbury Grand had ceilings higher than most dreams. Gold trim, glistening chandeliers, and a carpet so soft it almost swallowed your feet. It smelled like roses and power. Smile, Oliver said beside me without looking. I didn't. I just walked. Let them watch. We made our way toward the center, where Oliver's board members, executives, and investors lingered in well-practiced groups. Every conversation had a hidden goal. Every glance was a calculation. A man approached, smiling warmly. Oliver, glad you made it. His eyes shifted to me. And this must be... He waited. Lillian Cruz, I said, offering a handshake. I'm accompanying Mr. Blackwell tonight. Pleasure. I'm David Langley, Strategic Development. His handshake was firm, but his curiosity lingered. I wasn't what they expected, not a blonde socialite, not a seasoned executive. Just someone they couldn't categorize. Langley, Oliver said coolly, is one of the key leads on the Horizon project. The community redevelopment one? I asked. He blinked. You're familiar? I nodded. The pilot proposal for mixed-income housing and urban accessibility. Your last quarterly report showed a 3% uptick in projected return, but the model's still too numbers-based. You need more narrative if you want federal interest. Langley's jaw shifted. Oliver just looked at me. You've been reading our reports? He asked. I was bored, and your printer jammed, so I had to read what it spat out. Langley smiled wide. You've got quite the eye, Miss Cruz. She has more than that, Oliver muttered, almost too low to hear. That night, I wasn't just a prop on his arm. I spoke, I challenged, I listened, really listened. And something strange happened. They listened back. The room adjusted to me, not the other way around. People leaned in, investors asked for my thoughts, executives asked where I came from. I never lied. I'm a nanny, I'd say with a calm smile. But I used to study psychology. Community work is something I care about. Most people responded with polite surprise. A few didn't bother hiding their condescension, but Oliver? He just watched me like I was a riddle he'd never bothered solving until now. Then she came. Meredith. She floated in with her champagne glass and her calculated charm, flanked by two men in tailored suits and a smirk that barely touched her eyes. Well, she said, turning toward us like a queen addressing the room, red was certainly a choice. I held her gaze. It was. You're very present tonight. I figured I'd stop apologizing for existing. Oliver's mouth twitched, just barely. "Tell me," she said, sipping her drink. "Do you work in marketing? PR?" "I work with Leo," I said calmly. "I'm his nanny." Her smile deepened, like a knife unsheathed. "Oh, that's charming." I didn't flinch. "Isn't it?" I said. "He's a brilliant kid. And kind. Must be from his mother." Meredith's expression slipped for just a second. "And Oliver?" He chuckled. It was low, soft, but unmistakable. Meredith's eyes darted between us, something flickering behind them. Maybe doubt, maybe fear. I turned toward her. "You know," I said, stepping just a bit closer, "I admire you." Her eyebrows rose. "It takes real courage," I continued, "to wear a dress with that many layers and still look like you're floating." She didn't know if it was a compliment or not. That was the point. Later, when we walked away, Oliver leaned down and murmured, "That was strategic." "Thank you," I said lightly. "I meant it as a compliment." "I'll take it that way then." At dinner, I sat beside him while executives dissected projections and investors toasted to partnerships none of them emotionally cared about. I said little, but when I did, I made it count. "You have good instincts," Oliver said under his breath. "You're surprised. I didn't expect you to hold your own. Then maybe you should start expecting more." He looked at me. Really looked. "You're not what I thought." "And you're exactly what I thought," I replied. But I didn't say it cruelly. Just honestly. The gala ended past midnight. We stepped out into the cool night air, the driver already waiting. He opened the door for me, but before I stepped in, I turned toward him. "You saw them tonight?" I said. "Who?" "Everyone." They looked at me differently, you included. He didn't answer. "You want to keep using me for this?" I said. "Fine, but not as a decoration." He met my eyes. "No," he said quietly, "not as a decoration." He hesitated. "Maybe, as a partner." The word hung in the air, and I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. So I nodded, just once, and got in the car. Back home, I stood at my bathroom sink, wiping off the last trace of lipstick. The woman in the mirror wore the same skin I'd always had, but tonight she looked like someone I hadn't seen in years. Someone who could change her own story. And maybe, just maybe, someone who could change his too. Chapter 3, Unwritten Resume. He found her handwriting by accident. A folded page stuck between Leo's drawing book and a project binder. It wasn't part of any contract. Just an idea sketched in ink, full of hope. And it changed everything. The morning after the gala, the penthouse was unusually quiet. Leo had fallen asleep early after staying up waiting for me, and Oliver had retreated to his office with his usual brooding silence. I stood at the kitchen sink in my robe, hair still damp from the shower, watching the coffee drip slowly into the carafe. My heels from the night before were tossed by the front door, like evidence from a dream I wasn't sure had really happened. And the dress? The red one hung in the garment bag on the back of the door. I hadn't decided if I'd return it. Part of me didn't want to. Part of me wanted to never see it again. Oliver barely spoke at breakfast. He read the Wall Street Journal like it was his religion, flipping pages with precision. Leo sat beside him coloring. Dinosaurs, of course, his tongue poking slightly out as he concentrated. When I handed him a glass of orange juice, Oliver looked up at me. "You handled last night well," he said. "You say that like you expected me to drop the tray." "I didn't expect you to quote our social strategy files." "Some light bedtime reading," I replied dryly. He gave a faint smile, just barely. Leo piped up, "You looked like a movie star last night." I knelt beside him. "And you, sir, looked like a popcorn monster in pajamas." He grinned wide. Oliver watched the exchange like an outsider, still unsure where he fit. Later that afternoon, while tidying the living room, I noticed one of Leo's folders had been left open, papers scattered everywhere. Typical. I sat cross-legged on the floor to sort them, one by one. Dinosaur drawings, handwritten stories. A stick-figure family where I had big hair and Oliver had square glasses. And then, one of my own sheets. Folded, unlabeled. I opened it slowly. It was my handwriting, a mock-up from months ago, notes I'd made in the quiet hours of night shifts, an idea I never shared, a blueprint for a community learning hub, combining early childhood education, parenting workshops, and trauma-informed counseling. I had called it the listening room. I had forgotten I even put it in there. But somehow, it had stayed. That night, Oliver called me into his office. His sleeves were rolled to his elbows, tie loose, hair slightly ruffled, the least composed I'd seen him. "Did you write this?" he asked, holding the folded sheet. I froze. "Yes," I said slowly. "A while ago." He looked at it again. "You didn't submit this to anyone?" It wasn't finished, and I wasn't anyone. He looked at me sharply. "You're someone now?" "I was someone then too," I said, voice quiet. "I just didn't have the right stage." There was a pause. He sat down. "You know, this concept fills the exact gap we identified in the Horizon model." "I do now." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you weren't listening." He opened his mouth, then closed it. Silence settled between us, not cold, just uncertain. Finally he said, "Do you want to be part of it? Officially?" I blinked. "The project?" "Yes." I shook my head. "I'm not interested in being your image play anymore. This isn't about appearances." I crossed my arms. "Isn't it?" He stood up. "You think everything I do is calculated. Maybe you're right. But this?" He held up the page. "This is good. Too good to be hidden between crayon drawings." I looked at him, really looked. "Then you'll need to treat me like an equal, not a placeholder." His voice dropped. "I don't think of you as a placeholder." "Then prove it." The next morning, there was a new badge on the counter with my name on it. Lillian Cruz, Community Liaison, Horizon Project. No fanfare, no speech, just a laminated truth. I stared at it for a long time. Then I picked it up, and I smiled. Later that night, as Leo drifted to sleep with his head in my lap, I felt something unfamiliar. Not fear, not doubt, but the tiniest flicker of becoming. Not who I used to be, but who I was finally allowed to become. Chapter 4. Leo's Drawing. The crayon lines weren't perfect, but they told the truth. A stick figure dad, a small boy, and a woman in red holding both their hands. It was taped to the fridge. I found it while pouring juice. Drawn in uneven crayon strokes, Oliver, Leo, and me. He gave me long hair, a red dress, and a paper crown. At the bottom, in crooked handwriting, he'd written, "My family." I stared at it for too long, not because it wasn't beautiful, but because it felt like a wish someone had dared to make out loud. Later that morning, Leo tugged on my sleeve as I was tying his shoes. "Did you see what I drew?" he asked, eyes bright. I did. "Do you like it?" "I love it." He leaned in close, whispering like it was a secret. "I made your hair extra long because you look like a queen when you wear it down." I blinked hard and kissed his forehead. Oliver saw it an hour later. He stood there, coffee in hand, eyes fixed on the page. He didn't smile, didn't speak, but he didn't look away. And that said enough. That week was different, but quieter, in the best ways. Oliver started coming home early. He helped Leo with puzzles, even if his version of helping was just reading instructions aloud like he was solving a corporate merger. He listened when Leo talked about dinosaur names and asked questions like they mattered. He asked me things too. Not personal, not at first, but genuine. "What do you think about this investor's approach? Do we include more community voices in the proposal?" And once, when he thought I wasn't looking, he picked up the Horizon file I'd annotated with post-it notes and read them, cover to cover. One night, Leo refused to go to bed. "No bedtime unless you both come," he declared from under his blanket fort. So we did. The three of us squeezed into a lumpy couch fort made of couch cushions, fairy lights, and desperation. Leo insisted we watch cartoons and eat popcorn straight from the bowl. By the time he was curled up with his head in my lap, breathing steady, I looked up and found Oliver watching us. His eyes softened in a way I hadn't seen before. He didn't say a word, just reached over, pulled the blanket higher around Leo's shoulders, and sat beside me. For a long moment, the only sound was the soft, static hum of the TV and Leo's slow, even breathing. And for once, silence felt like peace. "I think he's happier," Oliver said finally. I nodded. He just needed time, attention, someone who isn't watching the clock. He hesitated. Was I that someone always watching the clock? I didn't answer, but I smiled. He took that as confirmation. "You're good with him," he said. "He's easy to love. You make it look effortless." I've had a lot of practice loving people who needed it. He didn't look at me. But he nodded, slowly, like he understood more than he wanted to admit. The next morning, while Leo was brushing his teeth and singing a song I'd made up for him about dinosaur superheroes, Oliver pulled me aside. "I want to talk," he said. "Tonight. Just us." "About what?" "About everything." That evening, I found him in the kitchen, sleeves rolled, hair slightly messy, holding 2 mugs of tea. "Didn't know what kind you liked, so I made both," he said awkwardly. I took the one that smelled like chamomile. He cleared his throat. "When I was a kid," he began, "my father was a man of routines. Stern, structured. Everything had to make sense on paper." He paused. "My mother, she was the opposite. Gentle, warm. She called me her little firefly." I blinked. "I lost her when I was 10. After that, the softness left the house, and I learned how to become unbreakable." I didn't speak. He continued, "I don't know how to be soft, but I watch you with Leo, and it makes me want to try." I set down my mug. "I lost my mom too," I whispered. "More recently." He looked at me sharply. "She had cancer. I dropped out of school to care for her. My sister was still young. Someone had to hold things together." "You did all that alone?" I nodded. "I became a waitress, a cashier, a nanny, whatever I had to be." Oliver looked down at his hands. "You make me feel like I've lived in a glass box," he said quietly. I smiled gently. "Maybe it's time to open a window." He didn't touch me, didn't try to kiss me. But when he walked me to the elevator, he said something soft. So soft I almost missed it. "I see you now, Lillian." And for the first time in a long, long time, I believed it. Chapter 5. The Elevator. We were only supposed to ride down 4 floors. But the elevator stopped, and suddenly, there was nowhere to run. Nowhere to hide behind sarcasm or suits. Just silence. And us. I had just handed Leo's backpack to the driver when Oliver stepped into the lobby, adjusting his cufflinks. He looked tired, but not in a way sleep could fix. Tired, like someone carrying the weight of too many perfect days. We were headed to a meeting together, an investor brunch downtown. He insisted I come. Said, I brought balance to the room. I suspected what he meant was, "You make me seem more human." He didn't say good morning. He just nodded toward the elevator. They followed. The doors closed. The elevator hummed, then jerked once. Stopped. The lights flickered. We both froze. Was that? He pressed the emergency button. Nothing. No signal, he muttered. Great. I exhaled slowly. Trapped in an elevator with my boss? What a plot twist. Oliver didn't laugh. Not at first. Then he did, quietly. "You know, I've been through hostile takeovers and board scandals," he said. "But this might be worse." I leaned against the mirrored wall, arms crossed. "You always like control?" He glanced at me. "Always." "Must be exhausting." He didn't answer. Just stood there, straight-backed, staring at the panel like he could will it into movement. After a while, he loosened his tie and sighed. "Claustrophobic?" I asked gently. "No, just not good at stillness." I nodded. "I used to be like that," I said, "before I learned stillness isn't the enemy, it's the mirror." He turned toward me. "What do you see in the mirror?" Everything I tried to forget. He didn't ask more. He just looked, really looked, for the first time that day. Minutes passed. Maybe 10, maybe forever. He finally sat down on the floor, legs outstretched. "This is ridiculous," he said. "Sit with me," he added, voice soft. I hesitated. Then I did. Back against the wall, our shoulders inches apart. Not touching, but almost. You know, I said, when my mom got sick, I remember thinking, this isn't how life was supposed to go. He looked at me. She'd worked so hard, she saved every dollar. She wanted me to be the first in our family to graduate. You were studying psychology? I nodded. I was going to be a trauma therapist. For kids. I used to think maybe if I understood pain, I could help people carry it better. He didn't blink. I think you already do, he said. I laughed once. Yeah? By dressing up and making CEOs look thoughtful? No, he said. By being real. That's rare in my world. A silence fell between us, not cold, just raw. Then he spoke again. My father used to say, emotion is a liability. That explains a lot. Raised me like I was a prototype, a walking resume. That explains even more. Oliver's voice dropped. After my mom died, it got worse. Expectations became rules, and rules became the only way I survived. He looked down at his hands. I'm still trying to unlearn that. Host, I tilted my head. You think you're cold, but I think you're scared. He met my eyes. What if I am? Then you're human. He exhaled. The elevator creaked. Still unmoving. Still sealed in its strange capsule of truth. If this were a movie, I said, we'd kiss right now. He looked startled, then amused. But it's not a movie, I added. And I don't kiss men just because the lights go out. Good, he said softly, because I wouldn't want the first time to be about darkness. He froze. First time? His eyes didn't move from mine. Not a dare, not a command. Just truth. Finally, the elevator buzzed to life. Silas brightened. The movement resumed. We both stood, quietly. As the doors opened, he turned to me. I don't want to go back to how it was, he said. Neither do I. We stepped out into the lobby. Still quiet, still unsure. But something between us had shifted. Not into love. Not yet. But into something with a pulse. That night I found a note tucked under my door. Just one line. I don't want to be a man who only knows how to win. I want to be a man who learns how to feel. It wasn't signed, but it didn't need to be. Chapter 6. Silence hurts loudest. I didn't need him to defend me. I just needed him to say something. But silence? Silence cuts deeper than any insult. The dining room at Luxor was all silver edges and polished lies. Oliver sat beside me, as poised as ever, dark suit pressed, voice low as he discussed international partnerships with men whose names I didn't know, but whose egos entered the room 5 minutes before they did. I wasn't supposed to be here tonight. Just dropped off a file his assistant had asked for, but when I walked in and saw Meredith at the center table, seated beside Oliver, I froze. And then she turned. "Oh, what a coincidence," she said with that familiar sugar-laced venom. "We were just talking about you." The room stilled, the way it always does right before something awful begins. "I hope it was something useful," I said, standing my ground. Meredith's smile didn't reach her eyes. "It always is. We were just explaining to our guests here that you're actually little Leo's nanny." Her voice was laced with sweet poison. She turned to a British investor and added, "Can you believe it? Such a touching Cinderella story." Eyes turned. Utensils paused mid-air. I took a breath. I didn't shrink. I didn't stutter. "Yes," I said, "I'm a nanny, and I'm proud of it." You could hear a glass being set down a little too hard. I've also been a waitress, a cashier, a cleaner, a caregiver, and through every job, I've shown up. I've learned. I've worked harder than most people born with last names you can't spell without Googling. A few laughs slipped into the silence. Nervous, sharp. Meredith didn't flinch. She just turned to Oliver. "Isn't that right, darling? She's quite the unconventional choice." I looked at him. I waited. He waited for him to speak, to say something, to step forward the way he had promised, with that voice that could command rooms. But he said nothing. Not one word. He stared down at his plate like it would answer for him. In that silence, it was louder than any insult Meredith had thrown. I stepped back, nodded once, and whispered, "Thank you for reminding me who I am and where I don't belong." Then I walked out. No tears, no dramatic exit. Just a woman walking away from the echo of disappointment. Outside, the city lights felt colder. I didn't cry until I reached the street, and even then, it wasn't sobbing. Just that kind of quiet ache you only feel when someone doesn't stand up for you, and it confirms every fear you've ever carried. I got in a cab. I didn't look back. Back at the apartment, Leo was asleep. His dinosaur nightlight glowed softly on the wall. I sat beside him, brushing a hand through his hair. He stirred, just a little, mumbling my name. And that broke me more than Oliver's silence. Because I wasn't just walking away from a man who disappointed me. I was walking away from the boy who had brought my heart back to life. The next morning, I packed. Not dramatically, just the way you pack when you know there's no way to stay and still keep your dignity intact. A thank you note for the HR staff. One for Leo, with hand-drawn stickers and a bedtime joke. And one, short and stiff, for Oliver. "Thank you for the opportunity. I wish you and Leo well. Please don't reach out. There's nothing more to explain." He didn't reach out that day, or the next, but I knew he'd seen the letter, because the investor blog headline started to swirl hours later. Nanny at the negotiation table, CEO's girlfriend or scandal, Blackwell's Cinderella, real or PR stunt. Social media wasn't kind, but a surprising number of comments rallied behind me. This woman carried herself with more grace than anyone in that room. We need more people like her in boardrooms. None of that mattered, though, because the only voice I wanted to hear had stayed silent when it counted most. Cliffhanger final lines. 2 nights later, I was packing the last of my notebooks when I heard something slide under the door. It wasn't a note. It was a folder. Thick, worn, with one label in familiar handwriting. Project Portfolio, Lillian Cruz. My old plans, my sketches, my ideas. Someone had been reading. Someone had kept them. And maybe someone wasn't done after all. Chapter 7. Chalk and Blueprints. He thought she was gone, but the echo of her voice lived in every drawing Leo made, and in every empty silence that used to be filled with her laughter. The penthouse was quiet again. Too quiet. Leo hadn't asked for cartoons in 2 days. He hadn't drawn another dinosaur. He just sat by the window sometimes, holding the little green dino she gave him, whispering, "Do you think she's coming back?" Oliver didn't know how to answer. He had answers for everything else. Market projections, negotiations, net earnings. But this? He had nothing. She had left without a word. Except one. "Please don't reach out. There's nothing more to explain." But there was so much left unsaid. He saw it in the drawing still taped to the fridge, the one Leo wouldn't let anyone touch. The one where Lillian wore a crown and smiled, bigger than anyone else on the page. He couldn't sleep. Not that night. Not after rereading the file she left behind, the project portfolio she'd poured herself into long before she ever set foot in his house. Pages and pages. Hand-drawn blueprints. Educational programs. Mental health access for low-income mothers. Financial literacy courses for single parents. Each page was hope made visible. Each note in the margin, "Start with what they already have, work from there," was a sentence more powerful than anything his analysts had ever printed. She wasn't a nanny with opinions. She was a visionary no one had ever asked to speak. Until now, the next morning, Oliver got in his car without telling anyone where he was going. He drove through the parts of the city his investors never visited, past the neighborhoods the Horizon Project claimed it would fix, but never truly knew. He passed corner stores with flickering signs, churches with hand-painted windows, kids running barefoot with untied shoelaces. And then, at the end of a quiet street, he saw it. A faded blue building with peeling paint. A mural along the sidewall. Children's handprints, names, words like hope and together, painted in chalky, bold letters. And in the center of it all, Lillian, captured in a photograph, laughing, her arms around 2 children holding books like trophies. He parked, walked inside. The woman at the front desk smiled. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for Lillian Cruz," he said, voice low. The woman tilted her head. "She used to run the community outreach here, organize food drives, built this place from the ground up." "Does she still work here?" "She doesn't, but her sister lives around the corner. Clara. You should talk to her." He did. The small yellow house had flower pots on the steps and a screen door that creaked when it opened. Clara had the same eyes. Sharp, quietly observant. "You're him," she said, not unkindly. Oliver didn't deny it. "He talked about me?" "She talked around you, that's how I knew you mattered. I made mistakes." "We all do," Clara replied. "But when you stayed silent in that room, that wasn't a mistake, that was cowardice." He didn't flinch. "I know. He didn't need you to defend her. She just needed to know she wasn't standing alone." He looked down. "There's no excuse for what I did." "No," Clara said, "but maybe there's still time to do something right." She handed him a worn envelope. Inside, more of Lillian's sketches. Outreach ideas. School programs, printed letters she'd never mailed, and one note scribbled in the corner of a napkin. "It only takes one person to believe in something for it to grow." Oliver stood outside the house for a long time before driving home. He didn't call her. Not yet. But he made a decision. That night, the Horizon Board received a surprising memo. "Effective immediately, we are implementing a revised social initiative plan, designed by Lillian Cruz. It reflects the heart of our original mission, because impact without soul is just noise." The next morning, Lillian's inbox chimed. An email. Subject: not an offer, a platform. From Oliver Blackwell. "This is not a job proposal. This is a foundation, a place to build something real, the way you always dreamed. You're not a guest anymore. You're the architect." She stared at it for a long time. She didn't cry. She didn't reply. Not yet. But something in her chest cracked open again. Not pain. Possibility. She stood by the window of her sister's house as the sun dipped low over the rooftops. And for the first time in weeks, she whispered aloud, "I'm not done." Because maybe, just maybe, neither was he. Chapter 8. The CEO's Apology. "I want to trust you again," she said. "Not I trust you, but want to." And that want was the closest thing to hope he'd heard in weeks. Lillian didn't walk back into Blackwell Holdings with fanfare. There was no red dress, no photographers, no soft music, just a white button-down shirt, dark jeans, and a folder tucked under her arm. But when she passed the security desk, the whispers started anyway. She wasn't the nanny anymore. She was the woman who'd told an entire room that pride wasn't always power, and then left without looking back. Oliver was waiting on the executive floor when the elevator doors opened. He didn't smile. He didn't step forward. But his eyes held something new, not calculation, regret. "Thank you for coming," he said. "Nice to hear you say please," she replied evenly, stepping off the elevator. They didn't hug. They didn't even shake hands. And that was exactly how she wanted it. The meeting room was quiet. She opened the envelope in front of her, scanned the offer. Social Impact Coordinator, Blackwell Holdings. Full autonomy, competitive salary, freedom to select her team. She looked up. "Looks good, but I've learned that in this company, what looks good can just be a show." "It's not," Oliver said. "Not this time." "Then here are my terms." She pulled a single sheet from her folder. "I want complete freedom to define the projects, no board vetoes." "Done. I choose my own team. No watchers from upstairs." "Agreed. Reports stay reports. No turning our work into shiny PR campaigns." "Understood." "And," she paused, "our relationship is strictly professional. No dinners, no texts, no comments outside of work." Oliver nodded. "I understand, and I accept." She extended her hand, and he shook it. And just like that, the contract was rewritten. Not in ink, but in respect. Lillian started that week with nothing but a desk in the corner of an unused floor and a whiteboard that still had someone's sales targets scribbled in marker. She erased it, started fresh. She built her team carefully. A brilliant intern from a local college who'd been overlooked twice because of her last name. A retired public school teacher with a gift for conflict mediation. A senior analyst with a quiet voice and big heart. Within 3 weeks, they'd launched 3 pilot initiatives. A scholarship program for at-risk high school girls. An empathy training series across departments. A childcare stipend for entry-level employees. Oliver watched from hallways, from behind glass. He didn't interfere. He didn't visit her office. But sometimes, he'd pause just outside the door and listen. She spoke with clarity, laughed with ease, moved with purpose. And for the first time since he met her, maybe for the first time in his whole life, he realized he was in awe. At home, Leo taped a new drawing to the fridge. It showed a house. 3 stick figures. One with glasses, one with long hair, one small with a cape. When Oliver asked about it, Leo said simply, "I want her to stay forever." Oliver couldn't speak, because Leo wasn't asking for a nanny anymore. He was asking for family. Later that week, Lillian stayed late to finish drafting a partnership proposal with a literacy nonprofit. When she stepped into the elevator, Oliver was already inside. They stood in silence, not tense, just quiet. Finally, he said, "I was scared." She didn't pretend not to understand. "I know. I let that fear make me smaller than I ever wanted to be." "You did. I'm sorry." She turned to him, and for the first time she softened. "I want to trust you again," she said. And that single sentence, it broke him in the best way, because it meant she hadn't given up completely. The next morning, a vase of yellow tulips sat on her desk. No notes, no signature, just a single post-it stuck beside the petals. "Let's start again. This time, I listen." Chapter 9. The ring in Leo's pocket. "Would you change the rest of my life by saying yes?" He asked it softly, in front of everyone. But really, it was just for her. The plaza was a sea of handmade signs, folded tables, and laughter. Children ran barefoot between craft tents. Mothers sold homemade bread and soap. Someone strummed an old guitar beneath the tree where once Lillian had sat with chalk in her hands and sorrow in her chest. But not today. Today was Community Day, the celebration of the social programs Lillian had helped design, fund, and grow. The seed she'd planted in silence had bloomed. And Blackwell Holdings, a name once whispered with skepticism, was now printed on banners that read, "Hope isn't charity. Hope is structure, vision, work." Lillian walked through the crowd wearing a pale yellow dress that moved with the breeze. Her hair was loosely braided down her back. No heels, no pretense. She looked like a woman fully in her place. A little girl handed her a painted flower pot. "You helped my mom get her job," she said shyly. "Now we can stay in our house." Lillian knelt to hug her. Behind them, Oliver stood watching. Leo tugged at his sleeve. "Now, Dad?" Oliver shook his head. "Almost." Leo frowned and held the small blue velvet box tighter in his fist. On the makeshift stage, a few local leaders gave short speeches. But everyone was waiting for her. Lillian stepped up to the microphone, took a breath, and began. This didn't start in a conference room. It started with one woman, tired of being invisible. It started with a little boy who made me laugh when I didn't know how to smile. It started with a community that taught me what power really looks like. As she stepped back, the applause rose like music, loud, warm, real. Then Oliver took the stage. He wasn't holding a paper. He wasn't wearing a suit. Just jeans, a button-up shirt, and his heart, for once, wide open. He turned to the crowd. "I used to think leadership was about control. That business was built on silence, distance, power. Then she walked into my world and turned it inside out. She didn't ask to be seen, but she made us all look closer." Then he looked at her. Everything else faded. "Leo," he called. The boy appeared from the crowd, running up the steps with a wide grin and the box in his hand. He handed it over. Oliver knelt. Right there, in front of everyone, "Lillian Cruz," he said, voice steady but trembling. "Would you change the rest of my life by saying yes?" The crowd stilled. Then a collective inhale. Lillian stood frozen, hand to her mouth, tears already falling. "You're serious?" she whispered. "I've never been more—" "You're impossible," she said, laughing through the tears. "And completely yours," he replied. She looked down at Leo, beaming, hopeful, certain. Then back at Oliver. She stepped forward, held out her hand. "You're still arrogant." "Yes. You take too long to say sorry." "I'm working on that." She smiled. "Then yes." The crowd erupted. Leo jumped up and down. "She said yes! She said yes!" Oliver slipped the ring onto her finger with shaking hands. Then she did the same. The kiss wasn't showy. It wasn't polished. It was real. And the whole plaza cheered. Except Meredith, who watched from the back, expression unreadable. But even she knew this moment couldn't be undone. Not now. Later, as the sun began to dip, Lillian stood at the edge of the plaza with Oliver beside her and Leo dancing with the children under strings of paper lanterns. "Do you regret how it all started?" she asked softly. "No," he said, "because contracts end." He turned to her. "But this?" He touched the ring. "This stays." As the music swelled, Leo pulled them both onto the dance floor. And beneath the golden sky, in a crowd of strangers and neighbors, they didn't just dance. They belonged. Together, as real as the stars. Sometimes love starts as a contract. But what's real stays. The community square had never looked like this. Flower garlands hung from the gazebo beams. Rows of folding chairs sat beneath strings of lights. There was no aisle runner, no orchestra. Just a hand-painted wooden sign near the entrance that read, "Welcome to something real." Lillian stood in front of a cracked mirror inside the neighborhood library, smoothing her dress with hands that didn't shake. The dress was simple, soft lace at the sleeves, a modest hem that brushed just above her ankles. No corset, no sparkle. But she looked radiant. Not because of the fabric, but because of the piece. Clara pinned flowers into her sister's hair. "You okay?" "I feel like myself," Lillian whispered. "For the first time in years." Clara smiled. "You always were, the world just finally caught up." Outside, Leo was fidgeting with the ring pillow. Oliver knelt in front of him. "You sure you remember what to do?" "Dad, I practiced this in my sleep." Oliver grinned and kissed his son's forehead. "Okay, astronaut, you've got this." The music wasn't classical. It was a trio from the local high school jazz band, and it was perfect. When Lillian appeared at the edge of the square, every voice stilled. People stood. And Oliver? He forgot how to breathe. She walked slowly. No veil. Just sunlight in her eyes and forgiveness in her smile. When she reached him, she said softly, "This still isn't a fairy tale." He replied, "No, but it's a true story." The ceremony was short. Vows spoken clearly, without rehearsal. "I loved you quietly at first," she said. "From the way you listened to Leo, to the way you apologized without expecting praise. I love you loudly now, because real love isn't hidden." "I thought strength was silence," Oliver said. "You taught me it's actually being seen, fully, and choosing to stay. I choose you. Every version, every day." They kissed, and the applause that followed was the kind that shook the sky. The reception was laughter and spilled juice boxes. Leo led a group of kids through a chaotic game of tag. Volunteers served food made by women who once sat in job training rooms, designed by Lillian. Oliver danced with Clara. Lillian danced with Leo. And for a while, it wasn't about second chances. It was just life. Messy, beautiful, ongoing. A month later, they stood on the national stage, together. Lillian in a navy blazer and jeans. Oliver holding Leo's hand. The National Social Innovation Award had just been handed to them. Not for a company, but for a community. Lillian took the microphone. "This began with a man who needed a nanny and a woman who needed a job. But what it became was proof that dignity and love don't ask for permission. Oliver added quietly, "We built a business that finally made sense. Because it started with listening." That night, back in their home, Leo yawned mid-cartwheel on the living room carpet. "Mom," he mumbled sleepily, "can you sing the Rocket Lullaby?" Lillian smiled and pulled him into her lap. Oliver joined on the couch beside her, and under a patchwork blanket they sang softly, "To a Boy Who Believed in Stars." Later, when the house was quiet, Lillian stood on the porch with Oliver beside her, both looking up. "I used to think love was a thing that happened to other people," she whispered. He looked at her. "And now?" She leaned into him. "Now I think it was always mine. I just had to be brave enough to say yes." They didn't need a perfect ending. They had this one, the real one. And under the same stars that once felt too far away, they danced again. This time, together, the lesson beneath the contract. There are stories we grow up hearing, not about perfect beginnings. Love at first sight. The prince choosing the girl with the slipper. But this wasn't that kind of story. This was a story about paper contracts that gave way to real promises. About a woman who once wiped fingerprints from windows, now leaving her signature on national programs. About a little boy who just wanted bedtime stories and accidentally brought two broken hearts back to life. Who thought control made him strong, until he realized vulnerability made him human. It wasn't instant, it wasn't easy, and it was never guaranteed. But what Lillian and Oliver found wasn't made of gala gowns or titles. It was made of truth, of shared pain, of forgiveness. Of that moment when one person looks at another and says, "I see you, and I choose you." In the end, love didn't arrive dressed in wealth. It came quietly, in the form of a drawing on a fridge, a child's question whispered in the dark, and a man finally brave enough to ask, "Would you change the rest of my life by saying yes?" And maybe that's what we all want. Not perfection, but something real, something that stays, even when the contract ends. If this story touched something quiet inside you, if you've ever been overlooked, underestimated, or silenced, know this. You are not invisible. You are not small. And you are worth choosing, even if no one's said it yet. If Lillian and Oliver's story meant something to you, take a moment. Leave a comment. Share it with someone who still believes in quiet beginnings. Because the next story, it goes even deeper, and it might just begin where this one left off. See you there.